Everyone. So this is going to be part 2 of the chapter 12 lecture. In this section, we're going to be discussing positive psychology. Just a brief overview of this field of study. I introduced it briefly at the very start of part 1, but let me go into a bit more detail. So to reiterate, this is a generally, or relatively, I should say, new field of study. It emerged in the 1990s and it was spearheaded by the former president of the APA, or American Psychological Association, Martin Seligman. And positive psychology is meant to kind of shift the attention towards some, as the name would suggest, positive elements of human nature. So our strengths, our virtues, our talents, and away from what has been the focus of many fields of psychology for a long time, and that is an emphasis on maladaptive emotions and behaviors, which tend to ignore the ways in which people function in a optimal or positive way. So again, emphasis on these strengths, these positive attributes that we could examine that lead to a person feeling as though life is worth living. So we're only going to be talking about a couple of core concepts or key strengths. I'll be reviewing forgiveness, gratitude, and humility, but just some other concepts so that you're aware of what else is often investigated within positive psychology. There's interest in happiness, resiliency, well-being. Those are just some of the many areas that are likely going to be examined in a bit more detail. But for our purposes, we're going to talk about 3 specific areas, beginning with forgiveness. Forgiveness, if we think about how this might be described, it is considered a pro-social process. And you might be thinking, well, what does that mean? It's important that we understand pro-social processes as what leads to harmonious relationships among people. It also leads to long-term relationships. So the focus is on creating or laying a foundation for loving relationships with others. So as you can hopefully detect as I'm describing forgiveness and some important elements, it's all geared towards interpersonal relationships and those that are long-lasting and healthy and loving. Now, forgiveness, if we think about it from that perspective, it's supposed to promote these positive feelings, or at least a shift away from the negative, which is, of course, common when you feel betrayed or hurt by someone. And even the person who causes the pain might feel regret and guilt. The person who has been affected by the behavior of another might experience sadness, they might experience a desire for revenge. So these are, of course, all negative emotions. Now, for a person to receive inner peace, then through forgiveness, this would be possible. It could be considered a path to healing. So achieving peace within themselves, with others, this is all meant to foster this healing process. And as this is occurring, ideally, relationships that maybe have been damaged because of certain events that have transpired or things that people have done, ideally these can be repaired, these can be mended. So there's a possibility for creating or reestablishing a relationship following a difficult event. Research is often done within this area is examining what forgiveness exactly is and what it isn't. So what would that look like, or what does it consist of? They're also interested in understanding how does it develop, how do we see emerge across people, and also there's research examining, is it always helpful? So what I've discussed so far is the importance of forgiveness for long-term relationships, for achieving this inner peace and healing. Now, that doesn't mean that because there are certain benefits to forgiveness that you need to ignore what has happened or how you've been hurt, but the emphasis is on letting go of these negative emotions that I mentioned earlier. So these would be negative thoughts. So maybe wishing harm on the other person who's caused you hurt. It also releases or is expected to lead to a release of negative behaviors. So wanting to retaliate or get revenge, and negative feelings. So I explained that one of the negative emotions someone is likely to have, understandably, after being hurt, is a feeling of resentment towards the other person. So by letting these things go doesn't mean ignoring or condoning the behavior, but it does allow for you to move on, to reach this inner peace that will allow for healing. Now, because of the benefits to forgiveness, or at least based on what's been identified thus far, there does seem to be a correlation with positive outcomes. And these are going to connect with part one. So for example, some positive outcomes are a decrease in anxiety. So we can maybe see that kind of connect with a decrease in stress. There's also been observed to be a decrease in depression, an increase in self-esteem, because the emphasis is on maybe recovering or mending relationships or establishing long-term relationships. We notice better interpersonal functioning, and it also lends itself to receiving social support from others because of this emphasis on the interpersonal nature of forgiveness. If we talk about a second key strength, this is where we turn our attention to gratitude. So gratitude, as I'm sure you're mostly familiar with, has to do with feelings of appreciation or thankfulness after receiving perhaps some kind of benefit. It's important for a variety of reasons, but namely, we notice that because feeling thankful allows us to feel good, it also is likely to provoke pro-social behaviors or helpful behaviors. So we're more likely to do good if we feel good. So interestingly, some research does show that people that report feeling higher levels of gratitude and appreciativeness are more likely to feel loving towards others, also more likely to forgive, which we've just talked about, and generally are much more helpful, extroverted, outgoing, and optimistic, as well as inclined to trustworthiness. So we notice a correlation with a variety of positive emotions, but also outcomes. Empathy, I didn't mention, but empathy has to do with understanding people from their perspective. So we can kind of boil that down to putting yourself in someone else's shoes. You can understand people's feelings from their point of view. That's empathy. And so we see that generated to a much greater degree when appreciation is experienced. Appreciation or gratitude also allows us, and I kind of alluded to this in a couple of seconds ago, with decreasing experiences that are related to stressful situations, because life comes with a lot of ups and downs. We can't realistically only focus on the good and ignore completely the bad or pretend like it doesn't happen, but it allows us to better deal with those instances. And because we go through moments where things may not be going our way, it makes us much more appreciative of those good times. So gratitude doesn't mean that we're looking at everything through rose-colored glasses. It's just that we're more likely to have a much more positive and optimistic outlook on life, much more likely to feel thankful for the things that we do have, for the good that we do experience, and that's going to be heightened when we do have moments where maybe things aren't going our way. The last key strength that I'm going to be reviewing is humility. I'll talk about generally how this is defined. It has a variety of different components, but a couple of key points are a person's ability to have a clear, so accurate sense of their own abilities. It also involves a person's openness to new experiences, interest in diversity of experience and learning more about what they don't know. They're also much more capable, those who demonstrate high levels of humility, to acknowledge their own mistakes and imperfections. Also, be much more likely to recognize any limitation, so any areas that might require improvement. So, generally speaking, humility has to do with, as noted in your online textbook, it's both a psychological virtue but an intellectual virtue as well. So, it's generally associated with character strength. As with the other key strengths I've noted, there are here as well some positive outcomes that we notice associated with this particular strength. So humble people are much more likely to do well in life. When they receive praise, they're more likely to pass that forward and be nice to other people as well. They're more likely, when they receive praise, to increase their effort and also find ways to challenge themselves. We also notice a positive association based on the research that has been conducted and what's outlined in your online text, a correlation with academic success, and that's particularly demonstrated with higher grades. So this will be the end of the Chapter 12 lecture. As usual, if you have any questions, require clarification, don't hesitate to let me know.